This scarf is terrible. My sister-in-law sneered, pinching the ultra-soft woven fabric between her manicured fingers like it was a contagious disease before dropping it straight into the garbage bin. My brother just stood there sipping his champagne completely fine, with his wife throwing away the only gift I brought to their baby shower. They thought they were humiliating the family disappointment in front of their wealthy friends. What they did not know was that the scarf they just tossed in the trash was spun from ultra-rare Vicuna wool valued at $150,000. Even worse for them, throwing it away just legally forfeited their $5 million inheritance. I did not shed a single tear. I just smiled, turned around, and walked out. My name is Maya, and I am 30 years old. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to watch arrogant family members dig their own graves because they underestimated your worth. Trust me, you will want to hear exactly how this played out. Growing up in a modest neighborhood in Southside Chicago, my brother Marcus and I had very different views on success. I learned the value of hard work, quiet building, and preserving our family history. Marcus, on the other hand, was obsessed with appearances. He spent his entire life running away from our roots, desperate to climb the social ladder and be accepted by the elite. At 35, he ran a boutique media agency that was secretly bleeding money, though you would never know it by looking at him. His ultimate trophy in this fake life was his wife, Chloe. Chloe was a 30-year-old white mommy influencer who built her entire online persona around beige aesthetics, organic living, and subtle bragging. She loved having a black husband for her brand diversity, but she had absolutely no respect for his family or our culture. Their baby shower was exactly what you would expect from two people drowning in debt to look rich. They had rented a sprawling modern mansion in the Hollywood Hills just for the afternoon so Chloe could film content for her social media pages. Walking into that house felt like walking into a sterile hospital ward designed by a luxury brand. Everything was bleached white cream or pale neutral. Towering floral arrangements of white roses sat on every table. Acoustic covers of pop songs played softly through hidden speakers. Servers in crisp uniforms wove through the crowd, carrying trays of overpriced organic appetizers and tall flutes of expensive champagne. The room was packed with Chloe's friends. They were all affluent, mostly white influencers and socialites wearing pastel designer dresses and tailored linen suits. They spoke in loud, exaggerated voices about their upcoming trips to Europe and their exclusive country club memberships. I stood near the edge of the massive living room observing the circus. I wore a simple, tailored black turtleneck and fitted trousers. I knew I looked completely out of place in their pastel wonderland, but I did not care. As I watched the wealthy guests mingle, I could feel their judgmental eyes sliding over me. To them, and to Chloe, I was just Marcus's poor little sister, the one they pitied, the one who supposedly worked as a struggling seamstress in a dusty basement repairing old clothes. Marcus spent the entire afternoon catering to Chloe. He wore a custom suit and a luxury watch that I knew for a fact he had put on a high-interest credit card. He hovered around his wife, making sure her angles were perfect for the cameras her team had set up around the room. He laughed a little too loudly at jokes made by the wealthy executives he desperately wanted as clients. It was pathetic watching my own brother reduce himself to a prop in his wife's fake life. When it was time to open gifts, the real performance began. Chloe sat on a massive wicker throne chair draped in expensive eucalyptus leaves. Marcus stood proudly beside her, playing the role of the perfect wealthy husband. The guests gathered around in a large semicircle, holding their phones out to record every single reaction for social media. Chloe opened box after box of ridiculous overpriced baby gear. There were imported French strollers, designer diaper bags that cost more than most people make in a month, and tiny cashmere sweaters meant for a newborn. With every gift, Chloe gasped dramatically, performed a flawless smile for the live stream, and loudly praised the expensive brand names. Then she reached for my gift. It was a simple, heavy, matte black box. It had no flashy ribbons, no glossy wrapping paper, and most importantly, no recognizable luxury logo stamped on the side. It was completely unmarked. "Oh, look," Chloe said, holding the box up by the corner with a tight fake smile. "It is from Maya." A sudden hush fell over the room. Several of Chloe's friends exchanged knowing glances and let out soft, mocking laughs. They had undoubtedly heard all the stories Chloe had invented about me, the lazy sister, the bitter underachiever who was jealous of their perfect life. Chloe pulled the lid off the box. Inside, resting on dark tissue paper, was the scarf. I had spent 3 solid weeks carefully overseeing the weaving of this specific piece in my private studio. It was a flawless, impossibly soft baby blanket woven from Vicuna, the most expensive and tightly controlled wool in the entire world. Its natural golden brown color was rich and warm, radiating a quiet, undeniable luxury. But to an untrained eye, to someone whose entire concept of wealth revolved around flashy logos and brand names printed in bold letters, it just looked like a plain, unmarked piece of fabric. Chloe lifted it out with 2 manicured fingers, dangling it in the air as if she were holding a dirty rag. Her nose wrinkled in pure disgust. She looked directly at the camera recording her, then looked at me, her expression a mix of fake pity and absolute contempt. "What is this supposed to be, Maya?" Chloe asked, her voice dripping with extreme condescension. "Did you knit this yourself in your little apartment?" I kept my expression completely neutral. I told her calmly that it was a receiving blanket for the baby. I explained that it was a family tradition passed down from our grandmother, meant to wrap the firstborn child to protect them and honor our heritage. Chloe let out a sharp, mocking laugh that echoed through the quiet room. "A tradition." "Well, Maya, you know I only use organic, hypoallergenic textiles from certified French boutiques for my baby. This feels like it is going to give him a severe rash. I mean, look at this color. It looks like a dirty rug. It completely ruins the aesthetic of my entire nursery." She did not stop there. She turned to the crowd of her wealthy friends, playing up the drama for her audience. "I appreciate the thought, I really do, but we have to be so careful about germs and cheap dyes. You guys understand, right?" The other women murmured in agreement, nodding sympathetically at Chloe's completely fabricated struggle. I looked past Chloe and locked eyes with my brother. Marcus knew exactly what that blanket represented. He knew how much our grandmother valued that tradition. He knew it was a symbol of the Black women in our family who had survived and built our bloodline. I waited for him to say something, to defend our family history, to tell his wife to show some basic respect. But Marcus just looked at me, then looked at the phones recording him. His desperate need to fit into this artificial, affluent white world completely overpowered his loyalty to his own blood. He shrugged, swirling the expensive champagne in his glass. "You know how she is," Maya Marcus said smoothly, offering a dismissive chuckle to the crowd. "She just wants the best for the kid. You should have checked her registry before you brought homemade stuff here." He stood there and validated her disrespect in front of 50 strangers. He threw me and our entire history under the bus just to save face. "Well, I simply cannot keep this in the house," Chloe announced loudly. She did not set the blanket back in the box. She did not politely hand it back to me. Instead, she turned to her right, where a large decorative trash bin had been set up for discarded wrapping paper. With a dramatic sigh, she dropped the masterpiece straight into the garbage. The incredibly rare fabric landed silently among torn cardboard and crumpled tissue paper. A few guests actually gasped at the sheer audacity of the gesture, but no one intervened. The camera just kept rolling. Chloe went back to her throne, dusting off her hands as if she had just taken out the trash, and eagerly reached for the next glossy designer bag. I stood frozen for a fraction of a second. I was not sad. I was not heartbroken. For years I had tolerated their snide remarks and their constant belittling. But seeing that scarf sitting in the trash changed everything. They had just thrown away their own salvation, and their blinding arrogance kept them from realizing it. I did not scream. I did not cause a scene that Chloe could use for her next viral victim video. Instead, I let a slow, genuine smile spread across my face. I did not shed a single tear. I just turned around, walked toward the heavy wooden doors, and left the mansion without looking back. The cool California night air hit my face as soon as I stepped out of the heavy wooden doors of the rented mansion. The suffocating smell of bleached roses and cheap champagne faded, replaced by the crisp scent of the Hollywood Hills. The valet brought my car around. It was not a flashy sports car meant to draw attention on social media. It was a custom-armored black Mercedes Maybach, a vehicle that whispered wealth rather than screaming it. I handed the valet a crisp $100 bill, slid into the driver's seat, and closed the door. The thick acoustic glass instantly and completely muted the outside world. I started the engine, the powerful motor purring silently beneath the hood. As I navigated the winding roads down the canyon, the orange glow of the streetlights rhythmically washed over my face in the dark cabin. I gripped the hand-stitched leather steering wheel, my manicured nails lightly tapping a steady, calm rhythm against the soft material. I felt no anger. I felt no resentment. All I felt was the profound, liberating clarity that comes when a trap you did not even have to set finally snaps shut on the people who deserve it most. Suddenly, the soft chime of the Bluetooth system broke the silence. The dashboard screen lit up with an incoming call on my encrypted business line. The caller ID simply read, David. I tapped the button on the steering wheel to answer. Good evening, boss. David said, his voice crisp, professional, and entirely devoid of the fake warmth I had just endured for the last 2 hours. I apologize for calling so late on a Sunday, but I needed to confirm a few details before the markets open tomorrow morning. It is fine, David, I replied, keeping my eyes on the dark, winding road. What do you have for me? I am finalizing the quarterly reports for Maison Noire, he began. We just closed the European distribution deal, and your personal equity in the holding company has officially crossed the 9-figure mark. The board is thrilled. They want to know when the CEO is finally going to step out of the shadows and take credit for building the most exclusive luxury fashion house of the decade. Tell the board they will have to wait, I said smoothly. The anonymity of the founder is what gives Maison Noire its true power. People do not buy our clothes just for the rare fabric. They buy them because they want to belong to a secret, untouchable club. Let them keep guessing. Understood, boss, David replied without missing a beat. Now, regarding your personal family matters, I was reviewing the legal packet for the brownstone property transfer in Brooklyn. The attorneys have drawn up the final documents releasing the $5 million trust fund to your brother. However, we cannot execute the transfer without the activation artifact. Did you end up placing the trust fund activation documents inside the gift box with the knitted scarf? I smiled, the bright streetlights reflecting in my rearview mirror. Yes, David. I put the sealed envelope right at the bottom of the matte black box, right beneath the Vicuna wool. For a moment, the only sound in the car was the quiet hum of the tires against the asphalt. David was quiet, processing the information. The terms of Nana's will were incredibly specific, and David had been the one to help me legally enforce them after she passed away. Nana was a proud, brilliant black woman who had purchased that Brooklyn brownstone back when nobody else wanted to live in the neighborhood. Over the decades, it had skyrocketed in value. But Nana knew Marcus better than anyone. She knew he was reckless, obsessed with social status, and deeply ashamed of his roots. Before she died, she placed the house in an ironclad trust. The condition was simple, but completely non-negotiable. Marcus would only receive his 50% share of the inheritance if his firstborn child was wrapped in the traditional family receiving blanket woven by the women of our bloodline. It was her way of forcing him to respect our history. If he rejected the blanket, he rejected the heritage, and he automatically forfeited his entire share of the estate. The house would then legally default entirely to me. I tried to hand him the keys to his future today, David. I said, my voice steady and cold. But his wife decided the scarf did not fit her beige aesthetic. She threw it in the trash in front of 50 people, and Marcus stood by and let her do it. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. She threw away a custom Vicuna piece and the trust documents. Both I confirmed. The terms of the will have been publicly and permanently broken. You can shred the transfer packet. The Brooklyn brownstone is now solely mine. Understood, David said, shifting instantly back to his ruthless corporate tone. Should I notify the estate lawyers to begin the title transfer tomorrow morning? Yes. And David, there is one more thing. I paused at a red light, watching the busy traffic of Sunset Boulevard rushing past the intersection. Marcus was not just broke. He was in incredibly deep trouble. I had known for months that his boutique media agency was failing. To keep up the facade for his white influencer wife, he had been taking out massive loans. When the traditional banks stopped lending to him, he turned to private, unregulated lenders. Shadow capital. Loan sharks who dressed in tailored suits but operated with absolute brutality. What is the current status of my brother's debt portfolio? I asked. David pulled up the files, the sound of rapid keyboard clicks echoing softly over the car speaker. Marcus currently owes just under $2 million to Apex Capital Management. They are an aggressive, predatory lending firm. His payments are 90 days past due. He was banking entirely on using his half of the Brooklyn brownstone as collateral to restructure the debt this week. Now that the trust is voided, he has absolutely zero assets to leverage. Apex will likely move to liquidate his agency and seize his personal bank accounts by Friday. I tapped my fingers on the steering wheel, a cold satisfaction settling deep in my chest. Buy it, I said. Excuse me? David asked, pausing his typing. I want Maison Noir's shadow holding company to silently acquire Apex Capital's entire debt portfolio for Marcus. Buy out his loans at a premium if you have to. I want to own every single cent my brother owes. When they come to collect his cars, his business, and his pride, I want them collecting on my behalf. It will be done by noon tomorrow, David said. Enjoy your evening, boss. The call disconnected. I drove the rest of the way to my private estate in Beverly Hills in comfortable, absolute silence. I parked in the massive underground garage, took the private elevator up to my penthouse, and poured myself a glass of vintage red wine. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the glittering Los Angeles skyline. For the first time in my entire life, I felt completely free from the weight of my family's toxic expectations and their endless disrespect. I slept better that night than I had in years. The next morning, the bright Los Angeles sun streamed through my bedroom windows. I woke up slowly, enjoying the quiet luxury of my high-thread count sheets. I threw on a silk robe, walked into the massive chef's kitchen, and started brewing a dark espresso. It was a beautiful, peaceful Monday morning. Then I picked up my phone from the marble kitchen island. The screen was completely lit up with endless notifications. I had 47 missed calls. Every single one of them was from Marcus. I unlocked the phone and opened my messages. There was a massive wall of frantic, terrified text messages from my brother sent back to back starting at 3 in the morning. Maya, please pick up. Maya, I am so sorry about yesterday. Chloe was just stressed about the baby. Maya, where did you get that scarf? Why did it have a certificate of authenticity in the box? Maya, please call me back right now. Maya, the estate lawyer just emailed me. What do you mean the trust is voided? I took a slow sip of my dark espresso, letting the bitter, rich taste coat my tongue. I scrolled down to the very last message on the screen. It had been sent just 10 minutes ago. It read, Maya, please tell me you have a backup copy of the trust documents. We realized what the scarf was and went to get the box out of the trash. But the caterers cleaned up early. We accidentally threw the entire box into the garbage disposal. The papers are shredded. The scarf is ruined. Apex Capital just called and said they are accelerating my loans. Please pick up. Save me. I stared at the glowing screen of my phone. He was begging the exact same sister he had humiliated just 18 hours ago. He wanted me to save him from a fire he had started himself. I set the phone face down on the cold marble counter. I did not type a single letter. Let him burn. Less than 10 minutes after I set my phone face down, the heavy silence of my penthouse was shattered by the sharp, persistent buzzing of the private elevator intercom. Only residents and pre-approved guests had access to that elevator. I knew exactly who it was. The building concierge called my secure line a moment later, apologizing profusely and explaining that my brother had practically shoved his way past the front desk, demanding to be let up. I told the concierge it was fine. I wanted to see the look on his face. I tightened the belt of my silk robe and walked slowly from the bright, sunlit kitchen toward the grand entryway of my penthouse. My bare feet moved silently across the imported hardwood floors, passing by expensive contemporary art pieces that Marcus could only dream of affording. I reached the massive oak double doors just as he began pounding on them with his bare fists. He was hitting the wood so hard I could hear his knuckles cracking. I pulled the heavy door open, looking down at him as he stumbled forward into the entryway. The man standing before me was a complete and utter ghost of the arrogant, polished golden child from the baby shower yesterday. The custom-tailored suit was gone. Instead, Marcus was wearing wrinkled sweatpants and a stained hoodie. His eyes were completely bloodshot, his face was pale and slick with a cold sweat, and he smelled faintly of stale alcohol and pure, unadulterated panic. He looked pathetic. He looked like a man who had just watched his entire fake world crumble into dust in less than 24 hours. Maya, you have to fix this right now. Marcus gasped, barely able to catch his breath. He did not say hello. He did not ask how I was doing. And most importantly, he did not offer a single word of apology for the public humiliation he and his wife had subjected me to the day before. I stood perfectly still, holding my small cup of espresso. Fix what, Marcus? I asked, my voice dangerously calm and quiet. Do not play dumb with me, Maya. The trust fund. The estate lawyers just sent me a formal notice of forfeiture. They said the conditions of Nana's will were violated because the receiving blanket was destroyed. You have to call them. You have to tell them it was a misunderstanding. Tell them we lost it, or that you are making a new one. Tell them anything. Just get them to reverse the forfeiture. He tried to step further into my home, his eyes darting wildly around the pristine, minimalist hallway as if he were looking for a magical switch to undo his mistakes. I did not move out of his way. I stood my ground, forcing him to stay exactly where he was. It was not a misunderstanding, Marcus, I said evenly. Chloe threw the blanket into the garbage. She announced to a room full of 50 people that she was doing it. You stood right next to her and defended her decision. That is not a misunderstanding. That is a highly public rejection of the inheritance conditions. Marcus ran a trembling hand through his messy hair, his breathing growing more erratic. It was an accident. We did not know what it was. Chloe thought it was just some cheap handmade thing you bought at a flea market. You know how her pregnancy hormones are right now. She is stressed about the nursery aesthetic. And the caterers, they are the ones who took the trash out too early. It is their fault the box ended up in the garbage disposal. We tried to fish it out, Maya, we really did. But the papers were shredded to pieces. I watched him scramble, completely fascinated by his inability to take accountability. He blamed his wife's hormones. He blamed the aesthetic of a nursery. He blamed the hourly catering staff. He blamed everyone and everything except his own blinding arrogance. It does not matter who took the trash out, I replied, taking a slow sip of my coffee. The fact remains that the scarf was the physical artifact required to activate your half of the trust. Nana's will was drafted by some of the most ruthless estate lawyers in New York. The language is ironclad. You wrap your firstborn in the blanket, you accept our history, and you get your share of the Brooklyn brownstone. You reject the blanket, you reject the history, and you forfeit the asset entirely to me. Marcus stared at me, his jaw clenching. He was starting to realize that his usual tactics were not going to work. He could not charm his way out of this, and he could not guilt-trip me into submission. So print a new paper, he demanded, his voice raising in volume. You are the sole remaining beneficiary. You can just draft a new letter of authorization, sign it, and tell the lawyers to release my half of the house to me. You can just say the conditions were met. Nobody has to know the scarf is gone. I looked at him with absolute disgust. You want me to commit federal estate fraud for you. You want me to lie to the attorneys and disrespect Nana's final wishes, all to save you from a financial disaster that you created. I am your brother. He yelled, his voice echoing off the high ceilings of my entryway. You owe me this. Apex Capital is breathing down my neck, Maya. Do you have any idea who those people are? They are not a bank. They are private equity loan sharks. If I do not give them the deed to my half of the brownstone by Friday, they are going to seize my agency. They are going to take my cars. They will take the house I am renting. Chloe will leave me if she finds out I am broke. You have to sign a new authorization paper today. He reached out, trying to grab my arm in a desperate attempt to physically intimidate me, just like he used to do when we were teenagers. But I was not the quiet, scared little girl he grew up with. I stepped back, my eyes locking onto his with a chilling intensity that stopped him dead in his tracks. Let me make this perfectly clear for you, Marcus. I said, my voice dropping to a low, authoritative register that commanded absolute silence. I do not owe you anything. For years I have watched you parade around pretending to be better than where we came from. I watched you marry a woman who openly disrespects our culture and treats me like dirt. And I watched you stand by and do absolutely nothing while she threw a $150,000 Vicuna masterpiece and our grandmother's legacy into the garbage. Marcus opened his mouth to argue, but I cut him off. You made your choice yesterday in front of your wealthy little friends. Now you get to live with the consequences of that choice. The trust is void. The house belongs entirely to me. And as for your request for a new document, I took a deliberate step forward, forcing him to back up toward the elevator doors. Rules are rules, Marcus. No scarf, no signature. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus stared at me, his chest heaving as the reality of my words finally crashed down over him. The panic in his eyes slowly morphed into something else entirely. It twisted into a dark, ugly rage. He realized he could no longer control me, and it drove him absolutely insane. You think you are so smart? Marcus spat his face, turning a deep shade of red. His hands balled into tight fists at his sides. You think because you have a little bit of money now that you can just ruin my life? You are a cold-blooded sister, Maya. You are dead to me. Do you hear me? Dead. I looked at him with a blank expression. Then leave my property. I will leave. Marcus snarled, jabbing a finger aggressively in my direction. But do not think this is over. You might have the house right now, but I am going to fight you for it. I will drag you through the courts. I will tell the entire family what a greedy, manipulative person you really are. I promise you, Maya, if you do not give me what is mine, I am going to make your life a living hell. He turned around, slamming his fist against the elevator call button. The doors slid open immediately. He stepped inside, turning to glare at me one last time before the metal doors slowly closed, cutting off his hateful expression. I stood in the quiet hallway for a long moment. He promised to make my life a living hell. What Marcus did not realize was that he had absolutely no ammunition left to fight with. He was a man walking into a war zone armed with nothing but his own misplaced entitlement, and I was already holding the detonator. After the metal doors of the elevator clicked shut, the silence in my penthouse felt completely different. It was no longer just the quiet of an empty room. It was the absolute stillness of a battlefield after the enemy has completely surrendered. I turned away from the entryway and walked slowly into my expansive living room. The morning Los Angeles sun poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long golden shadows across the imported rugs. I walked over to the long marble fireplace mantel. Lined up perfectly across the smooth stone was a collection of framed family photographs. I reached out and gently traced the edge of a silver frame sitting right in the center. Inside was a black and white portrait of our grandmother, Nana. She was a striking dark-skinned woman with sharp cheekbones and a gaze that could cut through steel. Looking at her face, I felt a deep wave of respect wash over me. She had orchestrated this entire victory from the grave. Nana was not born into wealth. She had migrated from the deep south to New York City with nothing but a suitcase and a relentless work ethic. She worked 3 jobs for a decade, saving every single penny she earned. In the 1970s, when nobody else wanted to invest in the neighborhood, she bought a beautiful historic brownstone in Brooklyn. Over the decades, that neighborhood gentrified. Property values skyrocketed. By the time Nana passed away, the house she had bought for pennies was appraised at a staggering $5 million. It was the crown jewel of our family, a physical testament to a black woman who built an empire from scratch. Growing up, I treated that house like a sanctuary. I loved the original hardwood floors, the intricate crown molding, and the rich history embedded in the walls. I spent my summers sitting on the front stoop with Nana, listening to her stories, learning the value of loyalty and hard work. Marcus, however, hated the brownstone. Even as a teenager, he was obsessed with projecting a wealthy modern image. He complained that the house was too old, the neighborhood was too loud, and the legacy it represented was not glamorous enough for the circles he wanted to run in. He viewed our grandmother's hard work as an embarrassment. He wanted shiny high-rises and country clubs. Nana saw right through his superficiality. She knew that the second she died, Marcus would try to sell the family legacy to the highest bidder, just to buy a sports car or impress his shallow friends. So when she drafted her will, she set a brilliant, legally binding trap. She left the $5 million property to both of us, split evenly. But there was a non-negotiable condition attached to his half. Our family had a long-standing tradition. Whenever a new generation was born, the women of the family would hand-knit a receiving blanket for the firstborn child. It was meant to wrap the baby in the warmth of our history and the protection of our ancestors. Nana's will explicitly stated that Marcus would only inherit his 50% share of the estate if he honored our heritage by accepting the traditional receiving blanket for his first child. The clause was a test of character. If he accepted the blanket, he proved he respected where he came from, and he would get his millions. If he rejected it, he legally forfeited his entire share, and full ownership of the brownstone would transfer immediately to me. Nana knew exactly what she was doing. She knew Marcus would eventually marry someone exactly like Chloe. Someone obsessed with aesthetics labels and social status. Someone who would look at a handmade family heirloom and see nothing but garbage. Nana gave Marcus the rope, and she trusted that his own blinding arrogance would make him tie the noose. I had tried to give him a fighting chance. When I spent 3 weeks knitting that blanket, I did not use cheap yarn. I sourced the rarest, most expensive Vicuna wool on the planet. I wanted to elevate the tradition. I secretly hoped that maybe, just maybe, Marcus would recognize the extreme quality of the garment. I hoped he would step up, defend our culture, and prove Nana wrong. But he did not. He let his white wife pinch our family history between 2 fingers and drop it into a trash bin because it did not match her beige nursery. He threw away $5 million because he was too busy trying to look rich to actually be rich. I turned away from the fireplace and walked into my home office. It was time to see exactly how much damage my brother had done to himself. I sat down at my heavy glass desk, opened my laptop, and accessed the secure server where David had uploaded the files regarding Apex Capital Management. The screen glowed brightly as I opened the dossier on my brother's debt portfolio. As I scrolled through the digital documents, a cold, hard knot formed in my stomach. I knew Marcus was broke, but the files in front of me revealed a level of desperation I had not fully anticipated. Apex Capital was not a standard financial institution. They operated in the shadowy gray area of private equity. They targeted desperate, failing business owners, offering massive cash injections with predatory interest rates and brutal collateral demands. Marcus had borrowed an initial sum of $1.5 million to keep his media agency afloat and fund Chloe's extravagant lifestyle. Because of the astronomical interest rates, that number had quickly ballooned to nearly $2 million. But that was not the worst part. I clicked on a scanned document labeled Exhibit A. It was a preliminary collateral agreement signed by Marcus just 3 weeks ago. I leaned closer to the screen, reading the fine print. My blood ran cold, followed instantly by a surge of pure adrenaline. In order to stop Apex Capital from seizing his business last month, Marcus had leveraged the Brooklyn brownstone. But because the trust had not yet been finalized, and because he only owned half of the house, Apex should have rejected the collateral. They did not reject it because Marcus lied. Right there, clearly written on the legal document, Marcus had claimed full uncontested ownership of the $5 million property. He had forged my signature on a fake letter of intent stating that I had agreed to surrender my half of the house to him. He had handed fraudulent documents to a syndicate of ruthless loan sharks, promising them the deed to the entire property by this upcoming Friday. If he defaulted, Apex Capital had the legal right to take everything. His agency, his personal bank accounts, his rented mansion, and the cars he leased. He had dug a massive financial grave, and he had tried to throw me into it to cushion his fall. That was why he was so frantic at my door. He did not just need the trust money to pay off a loan. He needed the trust to cover up a massive case of financial fraud before violent debt collectors came knocking at his door. He had planned to steal my inheritance to save his own skin. I sat back in my leather chair, a slow, dark smile spreading across my face. Marcus thought he was playing a high-stakes game of chess, but he did not even realize I owned the entire board. I picked up my phone and dialed David's private number. He answered on the first ring. "David," I said, keeping my voice perfectly steady. "I am looking at the Apex Capital files right now. Have you secured the acquisition of the debt portfolio yet?" "The transaction is currently processing," Boss David replied. "Maison Noir's shadow firm will officially own your brother's entire debt by noon today. You will possess the exclusive rights to collect." "Good," I said, my eyes locked on the forged signature on my computer screen. "Because when we move to collect, we are not just going to seize his business. I want you to prepare a legal team. We are going to hold him entirely accountable for financial fraud. I want him backed into a corner so tight he cannot even breathe." "Consider it done," David said. I hung up the phone and looked back out at the sprawling Los Angeles skyline. Marcus had promised to make my life a living hell, but by the time I was finished with him, he was going to beg me for mercy. I closed the laptop, letting the satisfying click echo in my silent home office. The morning had already been remarkably productive. But just as I stood up to pour myself another cup of espresso, my personal phone vibrated violently against the glass desk. It was not a single call. It was a rapid, continuous string of notifications. Ping after ping after ping, bleeding together into a solid, frantic hum. I picked up the device and saw that my personal social media accounts were being absolutely flooded. I unlocked the phone and opened the TikTok app. The screen instantly lit up, the harsh artificial light reflecting directly into my eyes in the dimly lit office. The very first video pushed to the top of my feed was Chloe. It had been posted only 3 hours ago, but it had already racked up over 2.5 million views. I tapped the screen to unmute the audio. Chloe was sitting in what looked like her meticulously decorated nursery. She was wearing an oversized, expensive beige knit sweater. Her blonde hair pulled up into a messy bun that probably took an hour and a half to style perfectly. A professional ring light cast a soft, angelic glow across her face. Her eyes were red and puffy. She looked straight into the camera lens, took a deep, shaky breath, and wiped away a single perfectly timed tear from her cheek. "Hey, guys," Chloe whispered, her voice trembling with manufactured vulnerability. "I really did not want to make this video today. I hate bringing negativity onto this page, but I feel like I have a responsibility to protect other young mothers out there who might be dealing with similar toxic family dynamics." She paused, looking down at her hands, as if she were gathering the emotional strength to continue her harrowing tale. "Yesterday was supposed to be the happiest day of my life," she continued, her voice cracking right on cue. "It was our baby shower. But the entire afternoon was completely ruined by a toxic family member. She did not say my name, but she did not have to. My husband has this sister. I have tried so incredibly hard to be welcoming to her. I have tried to bridge the cultural gap and bring her into our beautiful family. But some people just hold so much bitter resentment in their hearts." She sniffled, looking back up with wide, innocent eyes. She showed up to the party and brought a gift. Guys, it was this unwashed, dirty piece of rough fabric. It smelled strange, like a damp basement. Honestly, I was absolutely terrified to even put it near my unborn child. We have to be so careful about what we expose our babies to, especially when someone might be intentionally trying to bring harmful bacteria or dark negative energy into our safe space. I had to throw it away immediately for the safety of my son. I watched the video loop a second time, analyzing her performance. It was a terrifying masterclass in weaponized victimhood and subtle dog whistling. She was intentionally using her massive platform to paint herself as the innocent, pure mother, bravely protecting her child from the bitter, dangerous, dirty black sister-in-law. She completely twisted the narrative of a priceless family heirloom into a literal biohazard threat, and her audience ate every single word of it. I scrolled down to the comment section. It was a digital mob of epic proportions. Tens of thousands of comments poured in, validating her fake trauma and attacking a woman they had never even met. "Oh my God, Chloe, I am so sorry you have to deal with that toxic energy. Protect your peace, Mama. You did the right thing throwing it in the trash. That is so disgusting. Why are people so jealous of your beautiful, perfect family?" It did not take long for her rabid fanbase to do exactly what she wanted them to do. They figured out who I was. They had tracked down my personal private Instagram account. My direct message inbox was filled to the brim with hateful, threatening paragraphs from strangers. They called me ungrateful. They called me dirty. Some of the comments leaned heavily into disgusting racist stereotypes, accusing me of being an angry, bitter woman who was obsessed with ruining my brother's perfect white wife. They left hundreds of trash can emojis under pictures of my dog, my vacations, and my quiet life. A normal person might have been completely devastated by the sheer volume of hate. A normal person might have felt the panicked urge to jump online, post a tearful response video, show the receipts, and defend their character to a mob that had already made up its mind. But I just sat there watching the screen glow in my hands, feeling a deep, genuine sense of amusement. Chloe was actively doubling down on the biggest mistake of her entire life. She was so desperate for digital engagement, so hungry for the sympathy and the lucrative monetization that came with a viral victim story, that she was publicly documenting the exact moment she threw away her husband's $5 million inheritance. She was literally filming the motive, confessing to the destruction of the trust artifact, and broadcasting it to millions of people. It was a level of spectacular stupidity that I could not have orchestrated if I had a team of writers. I realized exactly what was happening behind the scenes of that video. Marcus was completely broke. He was facing the total collapse of his business and his freedom, and he clearly had not told his wife a single thing about it. Chloe still thought she was a wealthy, untouchable mommy influencer married to a highly successful media executive. She was using this fabricated family drama to boost her engagement metrics, completely unaware that the man she was sleeping next to was about to lose the roof over her head to a syndicate of ruthless loan sharks. As I watched Chloe wipe away another fake tear on the looped video, the screen abruptly changed. My phone buzzed loudly in my hand, cutting off her trembling voice. It was David calling me on the secure business line. I swiped to accept the call, putting him on speakerphone while I set the device down on the desk. "Good morning again, boss," David said. His tone was sharp and fast, indicating he had urgent business that required my immediate attention. "What is it, David?" I asked, leaning back in my heavy leather chair. "We have a rather interesting new development regarding Maison Noir's upcoming public relations campaign." David continued, the faint sound of papers shuffling in the background. "As you know, we are looking for a new agency to handle the fall collection rollout. The board just received the final submissions for the $2 million marketing contract." "Go on," I said, my curiosity piqued. "We received a massive joint pitch an hour ago," David explained. "It is from Apex Media Group, your brother's agency. They are pitching a comprehensive brand ambassador rollout, and they have aggressively listed Chloe as the primary face of the campaign. They are asking for a $2 million cash advance to secure her exclusive services and execute the marketing strategy. It seems they are entirely unaware of who actually owns this holding company. I stared at the black screen of my phone, letting the information wash over me. The sheer audacity of the pitch actually made a loud, genuine laugh escape my chest. It echoed through the quiet office. Marcus was drowning in predatory debt that I now owned. He was fighting a losing legal battle over a house that I now controlled. And his brilliant, desperate solution to save his life was to blindly pitch my own luxury company to bail him out. He needed that $2 million advance to pay off the loan sharks before Friday. And Chloe, the woman currently trying to destroy my reputation on the internet by calling me dirty and poor, was begging my brand to pay her $2 million just to wear my clothes. A cold, calculated smirk formed on my face. The trap was no longer just set. The mice had walked inside, eaten the cheese, and were willingly locking the cage door from the inside out. "David," I said, my voice dripping with dark anticipation. "Do not reject their pitch. You want to keep them in consideration, boss." David asked, a rare hint of surprise bleeding into his professional voice. "I want to do more than that," I replied, my eyes locked on the reflection of the Los Angeles skyline in my office window. "Tell the board I reviewed their portfolio personally. Approve them for the final round of the selection process. Schedule a formal in-person pitch meeting at our corporate headquarters for this Thursday." "Understood," David said, the realization of what I was doing clicking into place. "I will send them the official corporate invitation immediately." "Excellent," I murmured. "Make sure the invitation sounds incredibly promising. I want them to think they just won the lottery. I want them to walk into that building thinking they are the kings of the world." By the time the sun had completely set over Los Angeles, the city had transformed into a sprawling ocean of glittering lights. I had spent the remainder of the afternoon finalizing the trap for Marcus and Chloe with my executive team. When I finally closed my laptop, the penthouse was completely silent. I walked over to my personal wine cellar, selected a bottle of vintage Cabernet Sauvignon, and poured myself a generous glass. I carried the crystal glass into the living room and sank into the center of my massive, deep green velvet sofa. I leaned my head back against the plush cushions, taking a slow, appreciative sip of the rich red wine. For a few minutes, everything was peaceful, but I knew the peace would not last. Marcus was desperate, and when Marcus got desperate, he always called in reinforcements. He never fought his own battles if he could find someone else to do the dirty work for him. Right on cue, my personal phone began to ring from the glass coffee table. I did not even need to look at the screen to know who was calling. The ringtone was a custom alert I had set years ago. It was Aunt Valerie. Aunt Valerie was my father's older sister and the undisputed matriarch of the extended family now that Nana was gone. She was the head administrator at our family church back in Chicago, a woman who commanded fear and respect in equal measure from the congregation. But more than anything, Aunt Valerie was the ultimate enforcer of our family's deeply toxic patriarchal hierarchy. In her eyes, men could do no wrong, and women were born solely to absorb their mistakes and clean up their messes. I picked up the phone, tapped the green button to answer, and placed it on speakerphone on the coffee table. I did not say hello. "What is wrong with you, Maya?" Aunt Valerie's voice boomed through the speaker, harsh and completely devoid of any familial warmth. "I just spent the last hour on the phone with your brother. He is hyperventilating. He is having a panic attack in his driveway because you are holding his inheritance hostage over a piece of fabric." I did not argue. I did not defend myself. I simply sat there on the velvet sofa, slowly swirling the dark red wine in my glass. The heavy silence in my living room seemed to amplify her anger, creating a mounting pressure that would have easily crushed the younger version of me. "Did you hear me speaking to you, little girl?" Valerie snapped. "You are going to call those estate lawyers first thing tomorrow morning and fix this mess. You are going to sign a waiver stating the conditions of the will were met, and you are going to transfer that Brooklyn house to Marcus immediately. He violated the terms of the trust." "Auntie," I said, my voice quiet and perfectly calm. Chloe threw the family receiving blanket into the garbage in front of 50 people. Nana made the rules very clear. "Do not bring my mother into this." Valerie shouted, her voice echoing sharply off my high ceilings. We all know Nana was not in her right mind when she finalized that will. She was old and stubborn. And do not sit there and blame Chloe. She is a white woman, Maya. She does not understand our culture. She does not know our traditions. You cannot expect her to appreciate some old homemade blanket when she is dealing with postpartum hormones and trying to set up a modern nursery. You knew exactly what you were doing. You brought that ugly thing to her fancy party just to embarrass her. You set your own brother up to fail. I watched the deep red wine swirl in the glass, the liquid clinging to the crystal edges. The mental gymnastics Aunt Valerie was performing to protect a 35-year-old man and his bigoted wife were absolutely staggering. She was willing to completely erase our grandmother's legacy and excuse blatant disrespect, all because Marcus was the golden child. "The blanket was woven from Vicuna wool," I replied evenly. "It was worth $150,000. It was not a dirty rag." "I do not care if it was spun from solid gold," Valerie fired back without missing a single beat. "You are missing the entire point. Marcus is the oldest son. He carries the family name. He is a black man trying to survive and build a business in a corporate world that is set up to destroy him. He needs that $5 million asset to secure his future and provide for his new baby. You are just the younger sister. You are single. You have no children. You sit in your little apartment doing your sewing projects. You do not need a $5 million brownstone. You are just being greedy and bitter because he is successful and you are not." Her words were designed to cut me down to size, to remind me of my supposed place at the very bottom of the family totem pole. For my entire life, this was the exact script they used to keep me in line. Whenever Marcus failed, it was my job to step back, make myself smaller, and give him whatever he needed to feel big again. "You need to stop this selfish crusade right now." Maya Valerie continued, her tone shifting from aggressive to fiercely authoritative. "I run the community fund at the church. I have a reputation to uphold in this city. I will not have people whispering that my niece is a manipulative thief who stole her own brother's inheritance. If you do not sign that property over to him by Friday, you are done. I will personally see to it that you are completely excommunicated from this family. You will not be invited to Thanksgiving. You will not be invited to Christmas. We will cut you out like a disease." The ultimatum hung heavily in the air. She genuinely believed she held the ultimate leverage over me. She thought the threat of losing their toxic company would force me to surrender a $5 million estate and accept their abuse. I stopped swirling the wine. I took a slow, deliberate sip, savoring the complex flavor, and carefully set the glass down on the table next to the phone. "Are you finished, Auntie?" I asked, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "I am dead serious, Maya. Sign the papers or you do not have a family anymore." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees, staring directly at the glowing screen of the phone. I let a few seconds of absolute silence stretch out, allowing her to feel the total lack of fear on my end of the line. "Auntie, before you go ahead and banish me from the family forever," I said, my voice dropping to a low, chilling whisper, "do you know where Marcus got the money to buy Chloe that Hermes bag last month?" There was a sharp, stunned silence on the other end of the line. I could hear Aunt Valerie breathing heavily, her mind scrambling to process the sudden shift in the conversation. "What are you talking about?" She finally snapped, her voice losing a fraction of its absolute certainty. "Marcus bought that bag with his bonus. He runs a successful media agency." I let out a soft, humorless laugh. "Marcus has not seen a bonus in 3 years, Auntie. But you go ahead and ask him about the church community fund. Ask him what documents he handed over to private equity lenders last month. Have a wonderful evening." I ended the call before she could scream another insult, dropping the phone onto the velvet cushion next to me. The seed was planted. It would only take a few days for the roots of paranoia to crack her perfect image of her golden nephew. 2 days passed in absolute silence. No frantic texts from Marcus, No angry voicemails from extended family members. But I knew the silence was not a surrender. It was the deep breath before a desperate man pulled the trigger. On Wednesday morning, the concierge called up to the penthouse to inform me that a legal courier was waiting in the lobby. I told him to send the man up. I met the courier at my front door, signed a digital clipboard, and took possession of a thick, heavy manila envelope. The return address belonged to a low-tier aggressive litigation firm located in a strip mall in the valley. It was exactly the kind of cheap legal representation a man drowning in debt would hire on contingency. I walked back into my living room, tore open the thick envelope, and pulled out a massive stack of heavily stapled legal documents. I barely skimmed the cover page before I tossed the entire stack onto my glass coffee table. The heavy paper hit the thick glass with a sharp, echoing slap. I leaned over the table, bracing my hands on the glass, and read the bold print of the court subpoena. Marcus was officially suing me. I spent the next 20 minutes sitting on my sofa reading through the 30 pages of absolute fabricated garbage his lawyer had thrown together. The sheer audacity of the document was almost impressive. Marcus was not just contesting the forfeiture of the trust. He was launching a full-scale legal assault on my character and our grandmother's legacy. The lawsuit formally accused me of undue influence and fraudulent manipulation. Marcus and his lawyer claimed that Nana was not in her right mind during the final years of her life. They stated that her mental faculties were rapidly declining and that I had maliciously isolated her from the rest of the family to control her finances. The document painted a tragic, completely fictional picture of Marcus as the loving, devoted grandson who was pushed out by a greedy, calculating younger sister. But the most disgusting part of the lawsuit was their direct attack on the inheritance condition itself. Marcus claimed that the clause requiring him to wrap his child in the family receiving blanket was completely absurd and legally unenforceable. He accused me of secretly working with Nana's estate lawyers to insert that specific clause at the very last minute, knowing that his modern, forward-thinking wife would never accept such an unsanitary, outdated item. He was legally arguing that the Vicuna wool scarf was nothing more than a biohazard, and that I had weaponized a dirty rag to steal his $5 million birthright. I set the papers back down on the glass table. A cold, quiet anger settled deep into my bones. To save himself from the massive financial hole he had dug, Marcus was perfectly willing to drag Nana's name through the mud. He was willing to have a judge declare our brilliant, hardworking grandmother mentally incompetent. He was willing to publicly erase the legacy of a black woman who had built an empire from nothing, all so he could keep pretending to be a wealthy media mogul for a wife who did not even respect him. He thought the threat of a long, expensive court battle would terrify me. He assumed I would look at the massive legal fees required to defend myself and simply cave in, signing the brownstone over to him just to make the nightmare go away. He was banking on the fact that I was still the quiet, accommodating little sister who hated conflict. I picked up my phone and dialed David's secure line. "Good morning, boss," David answered promptly. "I was just reviewing the legal filings. It appears your brother has officially filed a civil suit regarding the Brooklyn estate. Should I contact our corporate litigation team? We can have this thrown out of court by Friday morning. His claims have absolutely no evidentiary support." "No, David," I said, keeping my eyes fixed on the thick stack of papers resting on the glass table. "Do not call the lawyers." There was a brief pause on the line. "You do not want to file a defense, boss. If we ignore a subpoena, he could win a default judgment." "We are not going to ignore it," I replied, a dark, calculated smile forming on my lips. "But we are not going to fight him in a courtroom either. That is exactly what he wants. He wants a drawn-out legal battle to buy himself more time with Apex Capital. I am not giving him a single second. Marcus wants to play dirty legal games. We are going to play something else." I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking down at the tiny cars crawling through the busy Los Angeles streets far below. "I want you to bypass the litigation team completely," I instructed. "Instead, I want you to gather every single piece of financial documentation you acquired when we bought out his debt portfolio from Apex Capital. I want the original loan agreements. I want the massive lists of his unpaid credit card debts. But most importantly, I want the fraudulent collateral documents he signed. You mean the documents where he forged your signature and leveraged the Brooklyn property? David asked, his voice sharp with understanding. Yes, I said. But not just those. I want the other collateral files. The ones regarding his second loan. The documents showing exactly how he managed to secure that initial $1.5 million cash injection last year when his agency first started failing. I heard the rapid clicking of David's keyboard. He pulled up the files in a matter of seconds. I have them right here, boss. The collateral he put up for the initial loan was a series of commercial real estate deeds, specifically 3 properties located in the south side of Chicago. Exactly, I murmured. Those properties do not belong to Marcus. They belong to the Community Outreach Fund of our family church. He used his position as a trusted family member to access the church safe, copied the deeds, and illegally leveraged the congregation's assets to fund his wife's luxury lifestyle. I turned away from the window and looked back at the pathetic lawsuit sitting on my coffee table. Package all of it, David. Every single forged signature, every predatory interest rate, and every piece of proof that he committed federal fraud against his own community. Put it all into a nice heavy legal binder. Where should I send the legal binder, boss? To the authorities. Not yet, I said quietly. I want you to send that binder overnight delivery signature required. Address it directly to the head administrator of the church board. Send it to Aunt Valerie. Consider it done, David said. I ended the call and let the phone drop to my side. Marcus thought he could use the law to force me into submission. But he was about to learn that the most devastating judgments do not happen inside a courtroom. They happen when the people who blindly protect you finally see the monster you really are. I woke up the next morning with a profound sense of anticipation. I made myself a cup of tea, walked into my home office, and opened my laptop. Since Aunt Valerie lived and worked in Chicago, I obviously could not be there in person to watch my delivery arrive. But David was nothing if not resourceful. He had hired an elite private investigator to park an unmarked van directly across the street from our family church. The investigator had a high-powered camera trained on the church parking lot, and he was streaming a secure live video feed straight to my screen. The voyeuristic point of view gave me a perfect, unobstructed look at the heavy brick facade of the church. This was the building where I had spent every Sunday of my childhood. It was not just a place of worship. It was the absolute cornerstone of our community. That church had been built on the small, faithful donations of hard-working Black men and women. The community fund was designed to help local youth and keep vulnerable families off the streets. It was sacred ground. And Marcus had casually handed the deeds over to predatory loan sharks to pay for his fake Hollywood lifestyle. Through the lens of the camera, I watched Aunt Valerie standing near the front steps. She was dressed in her usual immaculate attire, directing a few volunteers who were setting up for a local food drive. A delivery courier approached her, holding the thick, heavy legal binder. Valerie signed for the package with a look of mild irritation. She probably assumed it was just another piece of administrative paperwork. I leaned closer to my screen as she tore open the sealed packaging right there on the steps. I watched the exact moment her entire reality shattered. She opened the heavy binder. Her eyes scanned the first page. Then she flipped to the second. Even from 2,000 miles away, I could see the color completely drain from her face. The clipboard she had been holding slipped from her fingers and crashed onto the concrete steps. She was staring directly at the original loan agreements. She was looking at the undeniable, legally binding proof that her precious golden nephew had forged signatures to leverage 3 commercial properties owned by the church outreach program. Aunt Valerie pulled her phone from her purse. Her hands were shaking so violently she almost dropped the device. She made a call. I knew she was demanding Marcus come to the church immediately. I sat in my quiet Los Angeles penthouse and watched the live feed for another 40 minutes. Finally, a sleek rented luxury car pulled aggressively into the church parking lot. Marcus stepped out. He was wearing a designer suit looking incredibly stressed, but still trying to maintain his arrogant posture. He probably thought Valerie had called him over to deliver good news. He probably thought she was going to tell him she had successfully bullied me into surrendering the $5 million brownstone. The private investigator zoomed the camera in tightly on their faces. The footage was completely silent, but the body language playing out on my screen screamed louder than any audio ever could. Marcus barely had time to close his car door before Aunt Valerie was in his face. She did not just yell at him. She absolutely erupted. She took the heavy legal binder and threw it directly at his chest. The binder hit him hard, bursting open on impact. Dozens of pages of fraudulent collateral documents and predatory loan agreements scattered wildly across the asphalt parking lot. Marcus scrambled to catch the papers. The camera caught the pure, unadulterated horror, widening his eyes as he recognized the apex capital letterhead. He knew he was caught. Aunt Valerie was pointing a trembling finger right in his face, her whole body vibrating with righteous fury. She was screaming at him, gesturing wildly toward the church doors. Several church elders and volunteers came outside to see what the commotion was about. Marcus desperately tried to grab his aunt by the arms. He was begging, pleading, shaking his head as he tried to spin another web of lies to save himself. But the proof of his ultimate betrayal was literally blowing in the wind at their feet. He had not just stolen from his younger sister. He had stolen from his own people. He had jeopardized the safe haven of his community. Aunt Valerie struck him. She slapped him across the face with such incredible force that his head snapped to the side. The arrogant, wealthy media executive completely crumbled. Valerie turned her back on him in absolute disgust. She walked back up the stairs and into the church, taking the elders with her. The heavy wooden doors slammed shut. Marcus was left standing completely alone in the middle of the empty parking lot, surrounded by the scattered evidence of his own destruction. Right at that moment, my personal phone began to vibrate wildly on my desk. It was the massive family group chat. Aunt Valerie had taken clear photographs of the collateral documents before Marcus arrived, and she had sent them to every single aunt, uncle, and cousin in our family. The messages poured in like an absolute tidal wave. The exact same people who had called me selfish, bitter, and ungrateful just 24 hours ago were now cursing my brother. Uncle George called him a disgrace to the family name. Cousin Sarah said he belonged in a federal prison. They realized Marcus was nothing but a manipulative thief who had endangered the very foundation of our family. In a matter of minutes, the golden child was completely stripped of his crown. The extended family turned their backs on him forever. On my computer screen, Marcus was pacing frantically around his rented car. He looked like a trapped animal. He ran his hands over his face, pulling at his hair as the reality of his isolation finally set in. The private investigator had deployed a highly sensitive directional microphone from the van. Suddenly, a faint staticky audio feed clicked on, broadcasting through my laptop speakers. Marcus had pulled out his phone and dialed a number. I turned up the volume, listening closely to the ambient sounds of the Chicago street, and my brother breathing heavily into the receiver. He was calling his wife. "Chloe, listen to me." Marcus gasped into the phone, his voice high-pitched and completely terrified. He had absolutely no idea that his ruined sister was listening to every single pathetic word. There was a pause as Chloe answered. I could not hear her voice on the other end, but I could hear the sheer, raw panic radiating from Marcus. The family found out about the church deeds. Marcus cried out, tears of genuine fear streaming down his face as he stood in the parking lot. Valerie knows everything. They cut me off completely. Half the family is talking about calling the police. Chloe, I have absolutely nothing left to leverage. Everything is falling apart. He stopped pacing and leaned his head against the cold metal of his car door. I do not care what you have to do today, Marcus sobbed into the phone. When we walk into that corporate pitch meeting this afternoon, you have to sell it. You have to secure that Maison Noire ambassador contract, Chloe. That $2 million advance is the only thing that can save us from going to prison. You have to get that contract, or we are dead. I reached out and gently tapped the screen, closing the live video feed. The absolute terror in his voice was the sweetest music I had ever heard. I stood up from my desk, walked into my massive walk-in closet, and began selecting my outfit for the afternoon. I had a pitch meeting to attend. I stood in the center of my sunlit bedroom, the absolute silence of the penthouse, standing in stark contrast to the frantic panic I had just witnessed on my computer screen. Marcus was utterly destroyed. He was 2,000 miles away, entirely isolated from our family, and staring down the barrel of federal fraud charges. The trap had closed around him flawlessly. Now, there was only one loose end left to tie up. My personal phone vibrated against the cool marble of my vanity. I walked over and picked it up. Looking over my shoulder, the camera angle would capture the bright screen lighting up with a new text message. It was from Chloe. I unlocked the phone and opened the message thread. Her text was a massive block of text dripping with the exact kind of passive-aggressive condescension she had perfected over the years. Hey Maya. I know things have been a little tense between our families this week, but I am choosing to be the bigger person. I managed to pull some major strings and score a VIP guest pass for you to the Maison Noire corporate gala this afternoon. I am going to be officially signing my $1 million brand ambassador contract with their executive board. I thought it would be good for you to come and watch. Take notes on how successful people live, sweetie. Maybe it will inspire you to do more with your little sewing projects. Dress nice, they have a strict dress code. A sharp, genuine laugh escaped my chest, echoing through the quiet bedroom. The delusion was almost surgical. She was calling a standard corporate pitch meeting a gala just to make herself sound more important. Marcus was currently drowning in the consequences of his own financial crimes, begging her over the phone to secure this deal just to keep them out of prison. Yet Chloe was sitting in her rented Hollywood Hills mansion, completely oblivious to their impending ruin, typing out an arrogant text message to the very woman who was orchestrating their downfall. She was so desperate for an audience. She needed me there to witness her supposed triumph. She wanted to look down from the presentation stage and see the poor bitter sister-in-law marveling at her incredible success. She wanted me to feel small. She genuinely believed she was walking into a grand coronation. She had absolutely no idea she was walking straight into a public execution. I locked the screen of my phone and tossed it onto the plush velvet ottoman sitting in the center of my bedroom. I turned away from the vanity and walked toward the heavy double doors at the far end of the master suite. I pushed them open, stepping into my massive walk-in closet. As soon as I crossed the threshold, the motion-activated lights flooded the space with a warm, brilliant glow. It was not just a closet. It was a sanctuary of true quiet wealth. It was a physical manifestation of a decade of relentless hard work, sleepless nights, and absolute dedication to my craft. The room was larger than the entire apartment Marcus and Chloe used to rent before they started living on predatory credit. Custom mahogany shelving lined the walls from floor to ceiling. Rows of impeccably tailored suits, rare silk blouses, and one-of-a-kind runway pieces hung in perfect color-coordinated order. The air was thick with the rich, comforting scent of cedar wood and expensive leather. In the center of the room, encased in pristine glass display cabinets, sat my personal collection of handbags and accessories. Every single item in this room was a piece of fashion history. Every single item was paid for in cash. There were no high-interest credit cards here. There were no forged collateral documents or desperate loans from private equity sharks. This was the empire I had built in the shadows while they were busy mocking me in the light. Today was not a day to blend into the background. I bypassed the racks of understated neutral tones that I usually wore to family gatherings. I did not want to look like the quiet, accommodating younger sister today. Today I was stepping completely out of the shadows and taking my rightful place at the head of the table. I walked over to the protective garment bags housing my most exclusive designs and unzipped the sleek black canvas. I pulled out a stunning, razor-sharp crimson suit from Maison Noire's highly classified, unreleased winter collection. The fabric was dense, heavy, and undeniably luxurious. It was cut with aggressive, clean lines that demanded absolute respect and attention the moment you walked into a room. I took the suit off the hanger and began to dress methodically. Every button, every seam, every line of the fabric fell perfectly into place. I paired the crimson jacket with a delicate black silk camisole and a pair of imported patent leather stilettos that echoed against the hardwood floor with a sharp, commanding click. I pulled my hair back into a sleek, elegant style that left my face completely open and unapologetic. I stood in front of the towering floor-to-ceiling mirror at the end of the closet, adjusting the lapels of the jacket. I looked at the woman reflecting back at me. She was not the family scapegoat. She was not the poor seamstress working out of a dusty basement. She was a titan. She was the sole owner and chief executive officer of a global luxury empire, and she was about to completely dismantle their fake reality piece by piece. I walked back into the bedroom and picked up my phone from the velvet ottoman one last time. My eyes skimmed over Chloe's final sentence, the arrogant words glowing on the screen. Take notes on how successful people live, sweetie. I locked the phone and slid it into my designer clutch. A cold, predatory smile spread across my face, reflecting in the bedroom mirror. You want to see successful Chloe? I whispered to the empty room. I will show you successful. 2 hours later, the massive tinted glass doors of the Maison Noire corporate headquarters slid open, welcoming the afternoon sun into the ultra-modern lobby. The building was an absolute architectural masterpiece, located in the heart of the financial district. The interior was a cavernous space composed entirely of polished black marble brushed steel and towering walls of reinforced glass. It was designed to be beautiful, but more importantly, it was designed to be deeply intimidating. It was a physical manifestation of untouchable power. Walking through those doors, Marcus and Chloe looked like two entirely different species of desperate. If a camera had been following them, smoothly tracking their movements as they strutted across the black marble floor, the lens would have captured a tragic comedy of epic proportions. Chloe was fully in her element, entirely absorbed by her own delusions of grandeur. She was wearing an obnoxiously loud designer dress, completely covered in interlocking logos, paired with oversized sunglasses that she refused to take off indoors. She practically floated across the lobby, holding her phone out in front of her to record a live video for her followers. She was already treating the corporate headquarters like it was her own personal kingdom, completely unaware that her aesthetic was the exact opposite of the stealth wealth elegance Maison Noire represented. Marcus, on the other hand, was a walking disaster hidden beneath a fresh suit. He walked a half-step behind his wife, his eyes darting frantically around the massive lobby. His jaw was clenched so tightly the muscles in his face were twitching. He checked his phone every 10 seconds, undoubtedly terrified that Apex Capital was going to drain his bank accounts before he could get his hands on the $2 million advance. He was sweating through his expensive cologne, trying desperately to project the image of a successful media executive while his entire world burned to the ground behind him. They approached the front reception desk. It was a sleek, monolithic slab of black obsidian. Behind it sat a single receptionist, a highly trained professional who had already been thoroughly briefed on exactly how to handle these two specific guests. "Excuse me," Chloe said loudly, snapping her manicured fingers in the air to get the receptionist's attention. She did not bother lowering her phone, keeping the camera pointed right at the poor woman's face. "I am Chloe. I am here for the Brand Ambassador Summit. You should have my name at the very top of your VIP list. My husband is the CEO of Apex Media Group, the agency running your new campaign." The receptionist did not flinch. She simply offered a polite, practiced smile and tapped a few keys on her sleek computer. "Welcome to Maison Noire. We have been expecting you. Please make yourself comfortable in the main atrium. The executive board will be with you shortly." Chloe scoffed, leaning heavily against the obsidian desk. "Obviously, they have been expecting me. Listen, I need an imported sparkling water. Do not bring me anything domestic and make sure it is exactly room temperature. I cannot have cold water shocking my vocal cords before I sign my contract. Right away, Madam the receptionist replied smoothly, her face a perfect mask of corporate neutrality. Chloe turned away from the desk, flipping her blonde hair over her shoulder, and began strutting toward the massive atrium lounge. Marcus trailed behind her, aggressively loosening his tie as he looked around the room. It was then that they finally noticed me. I was standing in the shadows of a massive structural pillar near the edge of the atrium. I had buttoned a long, heavy black cashmere trench coat all the way up to my collarbone, completely concealing the razor-sharp crimson suit underneath. From a distance draped in the opaque black fabric, I looked like I was wearing the simplest, most unremarkable black outfit imaginable. I held a sleek leather portfolio in one hand, watching them with absolute chilling silence. Chloe stopped dead in her tracks, her mouth dropping open in exaggerated shock. She quickly tapped her phone screen to end her live stream, not wanting her followers to see the sister-in-law she had just publicly accused of being a toxic biohazard. Marcus froze right beside her, the color rapidly draining from his face as his eyes locked onto mine. For a brief second, I saw genuine fear flash across my brother's face. He had just been humiliated and disowned by our entire extended family this morning. He probably thought I had tracked him down to the corporate office to cause a public scene, or to confront him about the fraudulent church deeds in front of his potential new clients. He had no idea I was the client. Chloe, however, was completely blind to her husband's terror. Her initial shock quickly morphed into a wide, venomous smile. She shoved her phone into her purse and marched directly toward me, her heels clicking aggressively against the black marble. "I genuinely cannot believe you actually showed up," Chloe said, her voice echoing loudly in the quiet atrium. She looked me up and down with an expression of pure, unadulterated pity. "Look at you. You actually used the charity ticket I sent you. Did you have to beg on your knees to get past security? Because you look entirely out of place here." I did not say a word, not say I just looked at her, my face completely devoid of emotion. "I mean, I told you to dress nicely, Maya," Chloe continued, letting out a sharp, condescending laugh. "This is the headquarters of the most exclusive luxury brand in the world, and you showed up wearing a plain black coat that looks like you bought it at a discount rack. Are you here to ask the executives for a job in their sewing department? Because if you are, I can probably put in a good word for you after I sign my $1 million deal. Pity goes a long way, sweetie." Marcus stepped forward, grabbing Chloe gently by the arm to pull her back. He was not trying to protect me. He was trying to protect his deal. His eyes were wide and frantic as he leaned in close to my face, dropping his voice to a hostile, panicked whisper. "What the hell are you doing here, Maya?" Marcus hissed, glancing over his shoulder to make sure none of the passing staff were listening to them. "Are you following me? If you are here to embarrass me about the lawsuit or the church deeds, I swear to God I will have security drag you out by your hair. This is a multi-million-dollar corporate pitch. This is the only thing keeping me out of prison. Do not ruin this for me." I stared directly into my brother's bloodshot eyes. He was vibrating with anxiety. He was so close to the edge of the cliff that a single gust of wind could push him over. He thought he was giving me a stern warning, but all I heard was a man reading his own absolute final confession. "I am not here to embarrass you, Marcus," I said quietly, my voice calm and perfectly steady. "I am just here to watch the presentation. Like Chloe said, I want to see how successful people live." Chloe smirked, crossing her arms over her chest. "See, Marcus. She just wants to watch. Let her stay. It is good for her to see what real wealth looks like. It builds character. Just stay in the back of the room, Maya. Try not to touch anything expensive, and please do not speak to any of the board members. We do not want them thinking we actually associate with you." She turned her back to me, completely satisfied with her performance. Marcus gave me one last lingering glare, a silent threat, promising violence if I stepped out of line, before turning to follow his wife toward the plush leather seating area in the center of the atrium. I remained standing by the dark pillar, my hands resting casually in the pockets of my cashmere coat. They were so blinded by their own arrogance that they could not see the massive steel jaws of the trap closing directly over their heads. They thought they owned the room. They thought they were the main characters in a story about their own triumphant success. Suddenly, the heavy acoustic doors at the far end of the atrium swung open with a deep, resonant thud. The quiet murmur of the lobby instantly vanished. A tall, impeccably dressed older man stepped out into the open space. He wore a sharp charcoal suit and carried a silver tablet. It was Mr. Sterling, the Global Director of Human Resources and Partner Relations for Maison Noire. He commanded absolute authority, his posture straight, and his expression entirely strictly business. He stopped at the edge of the atrium, looking over the small crowd of agency representatives and potential partners who had gathered for the afternoon pitches. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sterling announced, his deep voice carrying effortlessly across the black marble room. "Thank you all for your patience. The executive board is now ready. We invite all agency partners and brand ambassador candidates to please gather in the main presentation hall for the final announcements." Chloe immediately jumped to her feet, smoothing down the front of her loud designer dress. She looked back at me one last time, offering a mocking little wave. "Watch and learn, sweetie," she mouthed silently. She linked her arm through Marcus's, and together they marched toward the presentation hall, entirely convinced they were walking toward their absolute salvation. I waited until the entire lobby had cleared out before I finally moved from the shadows. I unbuttoned my heavy black cashmere coat, letting it slide off my shoulders and fall perfectly over my arm, revealing the commanding blood-red suit underneath. I took a deep breath, the crisp air filling my lungs, and followed them into the hall to end their lives. I stepped through the heavy acoustic doors and entered the main presentation hall. The room was a breathtaking display of corporate dominance. The space was designed like a massive modern amphitheater, with steep rows of plush velvet seating cascading down toward a brilliantly lit center stage. Massive digital screens wrapped around the walls, projecting the sleek minimalist logo of Maison Noire. The room was buzzing with the low, excited chatter of high-powered executives, top-tier media buyers, and elite influencers who had all been summoned for the final decision. Down near the front row, Chloe was already completely in her element. She had immediately abandoned her husband to mingle with a group of fashion editors, laughing loudly and posing for photographs. She was completely oblivious to the fact that her husband was currently experiencing a full-blown psychological collapse just 50 feet away. Marcus had not followed her down the aisle. He had stayed near the back of the room, pacing nervously near the exit. When I walked through the doors, his head snapped in my direction. I watched the exact moment his brain short-circuited. He had expected to see his poor, pathetic sister hiding in her cheap black coat. Instead, he saw a woman standing tall in a perfectly tailored blood-red Maison Noire suit that commanded absolute authority. The dark crimson fabric absorbed the ambient light of the hall, making me look like a walking manifestation of power. He did not know that I owned the company yet, but he knew exactly how much a suit like that cost. He knew it was a piece of wealth he could not even begin to comprehend, let alone afford. His shock quickly mutated into pure, desperate rage. Before I could even take 3 steps down the carpeted aisle, Marcus lunged at me. He grabbed my forearm with a bruising grip and yanked me forcefully to the side. He dragged me out of the main hall and shoved me into a narrow, dimly lit service alcove, completely hidden from the crowd. The space was incredibly tight, designed only for catering staff to pass through. The walls were covered in dark soundproofing panels that instantly swallowed the noise of the presentation hall, creating a heavy, suffocating silence. We were standing mere inches apart. If someone had been filming the confrontation, the camera would have been forced into a tight, claustrophobic angle, panning rapidly back and forth between his flushed, sweating face and my completely unbothered expression. The physical tension in that small space was thick enough to cut with a knife. Marcus let go of my arm and slammed his hands against the wall on either side of my head, physically caging me in. He was breathing so heavily that I could smell the stale coffee and bitter panic radiating from his skin. His expensive custom suit was wrinkled and the knot of his tie was pulled completely crooked. "What kind of game are you playing?" Maya Marcus hissed, his voice trembling with an ugly mix of fear and aggression. "Where did you get that suit? Did you rent it just to come here and mock me?" I did not break eye contact. I did not flinch. I just looked at him with absolute clinical detachment. "I am not playing any games, Marcus," I replied smoothly. "I am just here to attend the meeting. You should go sit with your wife. She looks like she is having a wonderful time. Do not talk about my wife." He snapped, his face turning a deep shade of red. He dropped one hand from the wall and reached frantically into the breast pocket of his suit jacket. His fingers were shaking so violently that he fumbled for a few seconds before pulling out a crumpled, heavily folded stack of legal papers. He shoved them aggressively against my chest. "Sign them," Marcus demanded, his eyes wide and completely unhinged. "Sign the property transfer papers right now." I looked down at the crumpled documents. They were the exact same legal waivers his cheap lawyer had drafted earlier this week, the ones demanding I surrender my entire half of the $5 million brownstone. He had actually carried them into a corporate pitch meeting, hoping he could bully me into signing them before his entire world collapsed. "I told you my terms at my apartment," I said quietly, letting the papers fall from my chest and flutter to the floor between our feet. "No scarf, no signature. You broke the trust. The house is mine." Marcus let out a frustrated guttural sound, pressing himself closer to me in a pathetic attempt to use his physical size for intimidation. "You are going to sign those papers, Maya. I do not care what I have to do to make it happen. Valerie already told the entire family about the church deeds. My reputation is completely ruined in Chicago. I have absolutely nothing left to lose, which makes me incredibly dangerous to you." He leaned in so close I could feel the heat of his breath against my cheek. "If you do not pick up those papers and sign them right now, I am going to ruin you," he threatened, his voice dropping to a vicious, venomous whisper. "I will go to the police and tell them that you were the one who orchestrated the church fraud. I will tell them you manipulated Nana into signing that will because she had dementia. I will drag your name through the mud in front of the whole family, the courts, and anyone else who will listen. I will destroy your little sewing business. I will make sure you never work in this city again. You think you are so smart, but I will tear your entire life apart piece by piece." He was grasping at straws. He was an incredibly weak man trying to sound powerful, relying on the same toxic manipulation tactics he had used to control me our entire lives. He thought the threat of public scandal would terrify me into submission. He thought I was still the little girl who desperately craved the approval of our toxic family. He had absolutely no idea that I no longer needed their approval because I had already bought the building we were standing in. I looked at the desperate broken man cornering me in the dark alcove. I felt no fear. I felt no anger. All I felt was a profound, overwhelming sense of finality. This was the exact moment the dynamic between us permanently shifted. The golden child was dead, and the scapegoat had become the absolute ruler. I slowly raised my left arm, pulling back the sleeve of my crimson jacket, just enough to reveal the custom diamond-encrusted timepiece resting on my wrist. It was a watch that cost more than his entire media agency was currently worth. I looked down at the dial, watching the sweeping second hand glide flawlessly across the pristine face. I looked back up and locked eyes with my brother. A cold, predatory smile spread across my face. "You have exactly 5 minutes left to enjoy the last shred of your dignity, Marcus," I whispered softly. "I highly suggest you go out there and take a seat." Before he could process the chilling absolute certainty in my voice, the heavy acoustic doors of the main hall swung open directly behind him. The booming voice of Mr. Sterling echoed through the room, asking all partners to please take their seats. The presentation was about to begin. I left Marcus standing alone in the shadows of the service alcove, his chest heaving as the reality of his situation finally began to paralyze him. I stepped out into the bright, brilliant lights of the main presentation hall, leaving the heavy acoustic doors to swing shut behind me. The camera would capture this moment by slowly pulling back, floating high above the plush velvet seats to reveal the sheer massive scale of the room. It was an ocean of power and influence. Hundreds of the most important figures in the global fashion and media industries were finding their seats, their low murmurs creating a steady electric hum of anticipation. At the very front of the room, the center stage was bathed in crisp white spotlights, framed by towering digital screens that stretched from the floor to the vaulted ceiling. I walked smoothly down the carpeted aisle, the crimson fabric of my suit catching the light with every step. I chose a seat perfectly positioned right in the center of the auditorium, offering an unobstructed view of both the stage and the front row. Down in the VIP section, Chloe was already seated, practically vibrating with smug excitement. She had aggressively claimed a chair right in the middle of the front row, crossing her legs and adjusting her posture so she looked perfect for the cameras she assumed would soon be pointed at her. A moment later, Marcus stumbled down the aisle and collapsed into the empty seat next to her. He looked completely sick. He stared blankly ahead, his hands trembling violently in his lap. Chloe did not even look at him. She was far too busy whispering to the editor of a major fashion magazine sitting to her right, completely oblivious to the fact that her husband was currently experiencing a total psychological breakdown. The low hum of the crowd instantly died down as Mr. Sterling walked out to the center of the stage. He carried no notes. He simply stood perfectly straight, adjusting the microphone stand with a calm, practiced elegance. "Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen," Sterling began, his deep, resonant voice filling the massive room with absolute authority. "We invited you here today to discuss the future of Maison Noire. We are preparing to launch our largest global campaign to date, and over the past month we have been searching for a new brand ambassador to represent the heart and soul of our house." A ripple of excited whispers passed through the front rows. Chloe sat up even straighter, a brilliant plastic smile permanently fixed on her face. "Before we make any announcements, I want to remind everyone in this room exactly what Maison Noire stands for." Sterling continued pacing slowly across the stage. This brand was not built on flashy logos or manufactured social media hype. It was built on the quiet, relentless dedication to true craftsmanship. It was built on heritage. We source the rarest materials on the planet and we honor the artisans who spend their lives perfecting their trade. For us, luxury is not just about the price tag. It is about deep, uncompromising respect for the people who create the garments. He stopped pacing and turned to face the audience directly. "When we select an agency to partner with, and when we choose a face to represent our brand to the world, we require absolute alignment with those core values. Integrity is not just a marketing buzzword for us. It is the absolute foundation of our entire empire." Sterling paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle over the silent room. "Recently, we received a highly aggressive pitch for a $2 million marketing campaign." Sterling said, his tone shifting from corporate warmth to something dangerously cold. The pitch was submitted by Apex Media Group, proposing a massive rollout centered around a very specific social media influencer. Down in the front row, Chloe let out a loud theatrical gasp. She literally clapped her hands together, unable to contain her absolute joy. She turned to the fashion editor next to her, nodding enthusiastically, as if she had just won an Academy Award. Marcus, however, sank lower into his chair, his eyes darting frantically toward the exit doors. He knew something was wrong. He could feel the trap closing. "We took this pitch very seriously." Sterling continued, looking directly down at Chloe. "In fact, we were prepared to make a final decision today. However, less than 48 hours ago, a piece of recorded footage was brought to the attention of our executive board. This footage demonstrated a level of arrogance, disrespect, and profound ignorance that completely violates every single core value this company holds dear." Chloe stopped clapping. Her plastic smile faltered slightly, a flicker of genuine confusion crossing her face. She looked around the room, entirely unaware that the executioner was already holding the axe directly over her neck. Because we believe in absolute transparency with our partners, we have decided to share this footage with you today, Sterling announced, his voice echoing sharply. We want the industry to know exactly what kind of behavior Maison Noire will never tolerate. Sterling stepped back from the microphone and clicked a small silver remote in his hand. The bright stage spotlights instantly snapped off, plunging the front of the room into darkness. A second later, the massive towering digital screens wrapping around the presentation hall flickered to life. The screens did not show a sleek fashion commercial. They showed the bright, sterile living room of a rented Hollywood Hills mansion. It was the security and live stream footage from the baby shower. The video was incredibly high definition, and the audio was piped directly through the state-of-the-art surround sound speakers of the auditorium. Every single person in the room was suddenly watching a massive 50-foot-tall projection of Chloe, sitting on her wicker throne chair, reaching for a matte black gift box. "Oh, look, the massive digital version of Chloe," said her voice dripping with extreme condescension. "It is from Maya." A collective breath was drawn by the audience. Down in the front row, Chloe physically recoiled, her hands flying up to cover her mouth in absolute horror. Marcus buried his face in his hands, completely paralyzed. On the screen, Chloe pulled the lid off the box and lifted the Vicuna wool blanket into the air. In a room full of ordinary people, the fabric might have gone unnoticed. But this was a room filled with elite fashion designers, luxury textile buyers, and high-fashion editors. They did not need a label to know exactly what they were looking at. The way the golden brown fabric draped in the air, the incredible weightless texture of the weave, it was instantly recognizable to the trained eyes of the industry. A sharp collective gasp echoed through the dark presentation hall. Several designers sitting near me actually grabbed the armrests of their chairs in genuine shock. "What is this supposed to be, Maya?" Chloe's voice boomed through the speakers, mocking and cruel. "Did you knit this yourself in your little apartment?" The audience watched in stunned, uncomfortable silence as Chloe completely humiliated the woman who had given her the gift. They listened to her call the priceless Vicuna fabric a dirty rug. They watched her completely fabricate a story about germs and cheap dyes to make herself look like a victim in front of her wealthy friends. They watched Marcus stand proudly beside her, swirling his champagne, completely validating her horrific behavior. And then came the absolute climax of the footage. "Well, I simply cannot keep this in the house," Chloe announced on the massive screens. The entire auditorium watched in slow motion as Chloe turned toward the decorative garbage bin. A room full of the most powerful people in the fashion industry watched as she carelessly dropped a flawless $150,000 Vicuna masterpiece directly into the trash. The video cut to black. The stage spotlight slammed back on, blindingly bright. The silence in the presentation hall was absolute and terrifying. It was the kind of silence that only happens when a career is publicly, permanently destroyed. The fashion editors sitting near Chloe physically leaned away from her, staring at her with expressions of pure, unadulterated disgust. To them, she had not just insulted a family member. She had committed the ultimate cardinal sin of the luxury world. She had treated a rare, irreplaceable piece of artistic craftsmanship like absolute garbage. Chloe was hyperventilating. Her chest heaved as she darted her eyes wildly around the room, realizing that every single important person in her industry was currently looking at her like she was a disease. Mr. Sterling stepped back up to the microphone. The sharp click of his tailored shoes against the stage floor sounded like gunshots in the quiet room. He looked down at the front row with eyes as cold as ice. "As you can clearly see," Sterling said, his voice cutting through the tension like a razor blade, "Apex Media Group and their proposed ambassador do not represent the values of Maison Noire. We do not build empires with people who throw tantrums for social media engagement. And we certainly refuse to partner with those who maliciously trample on the hard work of others." Sterling leaned slightly closer to the microphone, his gaze locked entirely on Chloe's pale, terrified face. "Especially when the item you so casually discarded into the garbage was a masterpiece personally handcrafted by our CEO." The words hit the room like a physical shockwave. A massive wave of shocked whispers erupted across the auditorium. Down in the front row, Chloe gripped the arms of her chair so tightly her knuckles turned completely white. Her eyes were wide with pure, unfiltered panic. She shook her head desperately, her mind completely failing to process the terrifying reality of what Sterling had just revealed. "Wait!" Chloe screamed in shock, her voice cracking as she desperately looked up at the stage. "Wait, what CEO?" The desperate echo of Chloe screaming her question faded into the cavernous space of the presentation hall. Mr. Sterling did not answer her. He did not look down at her with pity or anger. He simply turned his head looking past the front row and directed his gaze squarely at the center of the auditorium. Following his lead, hundreds of heads turned in unison. The elite fashion editors, the high-powered buyers, the media executives, everyone shifted in their plush velvet seats to look exactly where Sterling was looking. I sat perfectly still for one final heartbeat. Then I slowly stood up. If a camera were filming this exact second, it would execute a very slow, deliberate push-in on my face as I stepped out from the shadows of the seating area and into the ambient glow of the stage lights. The stoic, unbothered mask I had worn for the past 48 hours melted away. A cold, victorious smile spread across my lips. I stepped out into the aisle. The heavy blood-red cashmere of my suit caught the brilliant stage lights glowing like a living ember in the dark room. As I began my descent toward the stage, the rhythmic, sharp click of my patent leather stilettos echoed through the absolute silence of the hall. The crowd parted their attention for me like the Red Sea. Whispers began to erupt frantically among the fashion elite as I walked past them. They were not looking at me with the disgust they had just directed at Chloe. They were looking at my clothes. They recognized the aggressive, flawless tailoring. They recognized the unreleased fabric. They recognized the undeniable signature of a Maison Noire masterpiece that had never been seen by the public. Down in the front row, Chloe tracked my movement. Her brain was completely short-circuiting. She looked at my suit, then looked up at the stage, then looked back at me. Her mouth opened and closed repeatedly like a fish gasping for air. She was trying desperately to reconcile the image of the poor, dirty sister-in-law she had bullied with the breathtaking, commanding woman walking down the aisle. But it was Marcus whose reaction was truly magnificent. He was paralyzed. His entire body went rigid against his chair. As I walked closer, I watched the exact moment the terrifying reality shattered his mind. He connected the custom suit, the absolute confidence, the unbothered attitude at the baby shower, and the terrifyingly fast acquisition of his massive debt portfolio. He realized I did not just work for the company, he realized I owned the entire empire. The sister he had belittled his entire life was the absolute monarch of the luxury world he had bankrupted himself trying to impress. He physically recoiled, pressing himself so hard against the back of his seat, he looked like he was trying to disappear into the upholstery. I reached the front of the room and gracefully ascended the short flight of stairs leading up to the main stage. Mr. Sterling stepped back, bowing his head in a gesture of profound, undeniable respect. He held out the microphone. I took the sleek metal device from his hand and stepped into the direct center of the blinding white spotlight. The room fell so incredibly silent you could have heard a single pin drop on the carpeted floor. Hundreds of the most influential people in the world held their collective breath, waiting to hear what I was going to say. The anonymity of Maison Noire's founder had been the greatest mystery in the fashion industry for nearly a decade. Everyone had assumed the brilliant mind behind the brand was an old European aristocrat or a seasoned industry veteran hiding in the shadows. I looked out over the sea of faces, letting my gaze sweep across the auditorium before finally locking eyes entirely with Chloe. "Good afternoon," I said, my voice projecting smooth and crystal clear through the state-of-the-art sound system. "My name is Maya, and I am the founder, sole owner, and chief executive officer of Maison Noire." A massive synchronized gasp ripped through the audience. Camera flashes suddenly erupted from the press section in the back, bathing the room in rapid bursts of white light. The fashion editors in the front rows began typing frantically on their phones, rushing to break the biggest industry news of the decade. I raised my free hand just an inch and the room instantly snapped back into terrified silence. I commanded the space effortlessly. I owned the air they were breathing. I turned my full attention down to the front row. Chloe was trembling. She had shrunk down into her seat, wrapping her arms around her stomach, as if she could physically shield herself from the devastating humiliation raining down on her. "You wanted me to come here today to take notes, Chloe," I said, my voice echoing with a dangerous, silky calmness. "You sent me a text message just 2 hours ago, telling me to watch you sign $1 million contract. You told me to pay close attention to how successful people live." Chloe squeezed her eyes shut, a single tear of genuine panic spilling over her eyelashes and ruining her perfect makeup. I looked at Marcus. He was staring at the floor, absolutely broken, completely unable to meet my eyes. "You both spent years treating me like a charity case." I continued pacing slowly across the edge of the stage, my heels clicking sharply. "You told your wealthy friends that I was a bitter, lazy seamstress. You built an entire online persona by stepping on my dignity to make yourselves look taller. You assumed that because I did not wear loud logos or rent expensive mansions, I was beneath you. You let your blinding arrogance convince you that you were untouchable." I stopped pacing and stood directly above them, looking down from the stage like a judge delivering a final sentence. But true wealth does not need to scream Chloe. True power does not need a social media live stream to validate its existence. I gestured toward the massive blank digital screens behind me. "Yesterday you stood in front of your friends and a camera and you threw a handmade baby blanket into the garbage. You called it a dirty rug. You told the world it was a cheap, unsanitary rag that ruined your perfect aesthetic. You thought you were throwing away a pathetic gift from a pathetic sister. But your ignorance is truly staggering." The fashion editors in the front row leaned forward, hanging on my every single word. They already knew what I was about to say, but they needed to hear me say it. "That scarf was not just a family heirloom," I stated, my voice ringing out with absolute, undeniable authority. "It was a prototype. It was a flawless, unreleased masterpiece designed in my private studio." I watched Chloe's chest heave as she struggled to breathe. She was finally beginning to understand the catastrophic magnitude of her mistake. "The fabric you held between your manicured fingers with such intense disgust was spun from Vicuna," I declared. "The rarest, most heavily regulated, and most expensive wool on the face of the planet. It took my artisans 3 weeks to weave that single piece. It was a completely flawless garment." I took one step closer to the edge of the stage, pointing a single finger directly at Chloe's trembling face. "That scarf you threw away was valued at $150,000. A collective murmur of shock and disgust swept through the audience again. People were shaking their heads, looking at Chloe as if she were a convicted criminal. But I was not finished. I had one final devastating blow to deliver before I moved on to the rest of their absolute destruction. "And because I brought that gift to your baby shower under the official banner of my design house," I continued, my voice dropping an octave, becoming cold and incredibly sharp. "Because the certificate of authenticity you ignored was registered to my corporate holding company." I paused, letting the silence stretch for 3 agonizing seconds. "You did not just insult my family. You just destroyed company property, Chloe." The sheer suffocating weight of my words slammed into Chloe like a physical blow, her face completely drained of color. The fashion editor sitting next to her, who had been laughing and joking with her just 5 minutes earlier, now physically shifted her chair several inches away, treating Chloe like she was radioactive. "You threw away a Vicuna masterpiece," I said, my voice ringing clear and steady over the hushed whispers of the crowd. "You publicly disrespected my heritage. You insulted my craftsmanship, and you destroyed property belonging to the very company you came here today, begging for a handout." Chloe could not speak. She just sat there, shaking her head slowly from side to side, her perfectly manicured hands gripping the armrests of her chair so tightly I thought they might snap. I turned my attention away from her entirely and locked my gaze onto Marcus. He looked completely hollowed out. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, and frantic. He was sweating so heavily that his expensive shirt was plastered to his chest. He knew this was not just about the scarf anymore. He knew the trap was closing on every single lie he had ever told. I gestured to the side of the stage. David, my financial assistant, stepped out from the shadows carrying a thick, heavy black leather portfolio. He walked up to the podium and handed it to me. I placed the portfolio on the podium and opened it, revealing a massive stack of heavily notarized legal documents. If a camera had been tracking the scene, it would execute a slow, deliberate pan moving from Marcus's completely terrified, sweating face directly to the stark white pages, resting under the stage lights. Maison Noire is not the only thing I own, Marcus, I said, my voice dropping to a low, authoritative register that commanded absolute attention. The room was so quiet that the sound of me flipping the first page over the microphone echoed like a thunderclap. 2 days ago, I continued addressing both Marcus and the captivated audience. You came to my home. You demanded that I commit federal estate fraud by signing a waiver stating the conditions of our grandmother's will had been met. When I refused, you hired a cheap lawyer and filed a civil lawsuit against me. You accused me of manipulating Nana in her final days, and you claimed the inheritance conditions were completely absurd and legally unenforceable. A low murmur of disgust rippled through the front rows. Marcus flinched as if he had been struck. He had tried to use the threat of a public scandal to force me into submission, so I was giving him exactly what he wanted: a public scandal. You filed that lawsuit because you thought you could bully me, I said, staring directly down at him. You thought I was still the quiet, accommodating little sister who would fold under pressure to protect your perfect image. But you made a critical miscalculation. You assumed that the scarf Chloe threw into the garbage was just a cheap piece of fabric. You assumed it had no real value. I picked up a document from the top of the stack. It was the official appraisal and certificate of authenticity for the Vicuna blanket, bearing the massive, recognizable corporate seal of Maison Noire. This document legally proves that the artifact you casually destroyed was an incredibly rare, highly valuable piece of textile artistry, I announced. And because its destruction was caught on camera, live-streamed to hundreds of thousands of people, and confirmed by the footage we just watched, the conditions of the trust are completely and permanently broken. I paused, letting the silent stretch forcing Marcus to sit in the excruciating reality of his own actions. Nana's will was drafted by the finest estate lawyers in New York, I continued. The language is ironclad. You wrap your firstborn in the traditional family blanket, and you get your $5 million inheritance. You reject the blanket, you reject the heritage, and you forfeit the asset. I gestured toward the wings of the stage. A tall, sharply dressed man stepped out into the light. It was my lead corporate attorney, a man whose hourly rate Marcus could never dream of affording. He approached the podium, his expression entirely stoic and professional. Mr. Sterling, the attorney, said, his voice projecting clearly across the room. As the legal representative for the chief executive officer of Maison Noire and as the executor of the late Dorothy Wilson's estate, I am formally announcing that as of 10 o'clock this morning, the trust forfeiture has been legally finalized. The attorney looked directly down at Marcus. Because you publicly discarded the specific artifact required to activate your inheritance, you have legally breached the non-negotiable terms of the will. Therefore, 100% ownership of the $5 million Brooklyn brownstone has automatically and permanently transferred to Maya Wilson. Marcus let out a strangled, breathless sound. It was the sound of a man who had just watched his last lifeline snap. He did not just lose a house. He lost the only piece of collateral he was desperately hoping to use to pay off the loan sharks circling his agency. I picked up the final document from the stack. It was the civil lawsuit his cheap lawyer had filed against me. As for this pathetic lawsuit, I said, holding the papers up for the entire auditorium to see, my legal team will not be responding to these fabricated claims in court. We will be seeking immediate dismissal with prejudice, accompanied by a massive countersuit for defamation and emotional distress. You tried to drag our grandmother's name through the mud to save your own skin. You failed. I dropped the lawsuit onto the podium with a sharp, heavy thud. "You have nothing left to leverage, Marcus," I said coldly. The words finally broke him. The pristine, wealthy image he had spent a decade carefully constructing, completely shattered right there in front of the most powerful people in the industry. Marcus scrambled out of his seat. He stumbled forward, ignoring the gasps and horrified looks from the fashion editors around him. He moved awkwardly, his legs practically giving out as he reached the edge of the stage. "Maya, please," Marcus gasped, his voice cracking as he looked up at me. He did not try to stand tall. He did not try to maintain his fake dignity. Right there in front of the cameras, the executives and his completely silent, terrified wife, Marcus, dropped heavily to his knees. He crashed onto the carpeted floor, his hands gripping the edge of the stage, as if he were holding on for dear life. Tears were streaming freely down his face, completely ruining his composed facade. "I am sorry," he sobbed loudly, his voice echoing through the silent presentation hall. "I am so sorry. You can have the house. I do not care about the house anymore. I will drop the lawsuit today. I will do whatever you want." He was begging. The golden child was kneeling at the feet of the scapegoat, begging for mercy. "Just please," Marcus cried out, his voice turning into a high-pitched, desperate wail. "Please, Maya, you have to help me. I am begging you. Just loan me $200,000. I just need a cash advance. Apex Capital called me 20 minutes ago. The loan sharks are on their way right now to smash up my agency. They are going to take my cars. They are going to take everything. If I do not wire them a down payment by 5 o'clock, they are going to ruin me. Please, Maya, save me." The sound of Marcus sobbing echoed pathetically through the presentation hall. He was a grown man, a man who had spent his entire adult life projecting an image of untouchable superiority, now reduced to a weeping, trembling mess on the carpeted floor. The elite fashion editors and media executives sitting in the front rows watched him with expressions of absolute revulsion. He had just admitted to being pursued by violent loan sharks in the middle of the most prestigious corporate event of the year. I looked down at him. If a camera had been capturing this exact moment, it would have zoomed into a tight, incredibly close-up shot of my eyes. They were ice cold. There was no sympathy, no hesitation, and absolutely no familial warmth left in my soul for the man kneeling at my feet. He had burned every bridge between us, and now he was crying because he was standing in the ashes. "You want a cash advance, Marcus?" I asked, my voice deadly quiet, but amplified perfectly by the microphone so the entire auditorium could hear every single word. "You want me to give you $200,000 to pay off Apex Capital before they destroy your agency?" "Yes," Marcus choked out, wiping his nose with the back of his trembling hand. "Please, I will pay you back. I swear to God, Maya, I will pay back every single cent. Just do not let them take everything I have." I let out a soft, humorless laugh that sent a visible shiver down his spine. "You do not need to worry about Apex Capital sending thugs to your office today, Marcus," I said smoothly. "You do not need to wire them a down payment by 5 o'clock. Marcus stopped crying for a fraction of a second. A brief, pathetic glimmer of hope flashed across his bloodshot eyes. He actually thought I was going to save him. He thought the little sister he had abused for decades was going to write him a check and make all of his nightmares disappear. "Do not look so relieved," I continued, my voice dropping into a razor-sharp register. "Apex Capital is no longer managing your account. They sold your debt." Marcus blinked, his face twisting in confusion. "Sold it? To who?" I leaned forward, resting my hands on the edges of the wooden podium. I looked down at him with a smile that was entirely devoid of mercy. "Because the entity that bought out your entire massive debt portfolio last week," I announced, articulating every syllable with deliberate precision, "is a private debt collection firm entirely owned by my corporate conglomerate." The words struck him with the force of a speeding freight train. Marcus physically collapsed backward, catching himself on his hands as his brain frantically tried to process the absolute magnitude of what I had just said. I do not just own this luxury fashion house, Marcus, I declared, projecting my voice across the silent, captivated room. I own your loans. I own the predatory interest rates you agreed to. I own the fraudulent collateral documents you signed using the church deeds. You do not owe faceless loan sharks $2 million anymore. You owe me. I own your agency. I own the cars you lease. I own the furniture in your rented Hollywood mansion. Every single thing you have ever claimed as your own belongs entirely to me. A collective gasp swept through the auditorium. The absolute brilliance and ruthlessness of the trap left the industry veterans in the crowd completely stunned. I turned my gaze away from my brother and locked eyes with Chloe. She was still sitting in the front row, but she looked like a ghost. Her perfect posture had completely collapsed. "And you, Chloe," I said, addressing her directly. "You thought you married a highly successful media mogul. You thought you could use his wealth to fund your beige aesthetic and your fake internet life while treating his family like dirt. But your husband is completely broke. He has been broke for years. He has been funding your designer lifestyle with illegal high-interest loans from shadow banks. You do not have a $1 million brand ambassador contract. You do not have a $5 million brownstone. By the end of this week, you are not even going to have a house to live in." Chloe let out a high-pitched, hysterical sob. She pressed her hands over her ears as if trying to block out the devastating reality of her completely ruined life. She looked at Marcus with an expression of pure, unadulterated hatred. The fake, perfect marriage she paraded on social media was dead. "Every single escape route you thought you had is entirely severed," I said, my voice echoing with finality. "You came here today to mock me. You came here to step on my dignity so you could elevate your own. But you leave here with absolutely nothing. You have no contract, you have no house, you have no money. And after today, you have absolutely no reputation left in this industry." I stepped back from the microphone and turned to Mr. Sterling. I gave him a single subtle nod. Sterling immediately raised his hand, signaling the back of the auditorium. The heavy acoustic doors swung open, and 4 massive, broad-shouldered corporate security guards stepped into the presentation hall. They moved with swift, silent precision, marching directly down the center aisle toward the stage. "Mr. Wilson, Mrs. Wilson Sterling," announced his voice booming with absolute authority. "You are trespassing on Maison Noire property. It is time for you to leave." The security guards reached the front row. 2 of them grabbed Marcus by the arms, hauling him up from his knees with effortless strength. The other 2 stepped toward Chloe, gesturing firmly for her to stand up. "No," Marcus screamed, struggling uselessly against the massive guards as they began to drag him backward up the aisle. "Maya, you cannot do this! You are my sister! Please!" Chloe burst into hysterical, uncontrollable tears. "Do not touch me," she shrieked as the guards firmly escorted her out of the row. "I am an influencer. I will sue you. Let me go." But nobody in the auditorium cared. The fashion editors, the executives, and the buyers simply watched in absolute silence as the screaming, sobbing couple was dragged past them. They watched the total public destruction of 2 people who had dared to disrespect the foundation of the empire they were standing in. I stood silently on the stage, watching them disappear into the shadows of the aisle. The sounds of Marcus begging and Chloe shrieking faded as the guards dragged them out into the lobby. A moment later, the heavy acoustic doors slammed shut behind them with a deep, satisfying thud, cutting off their voices completely. The presentation hall was quiet once again. I took a deep, calming breath, adjusting the lapels of my crimson suit. I turned back to the microphone, looking out over the sea of stunned, captivated executives. "Now then," I said, offering the crowd a warm, brilliant smile. "Let us discuss the future of Maison Noire." The scene cuts back to my living room, the exact place where I started telling you this story. The frantic energy of that corporate presentation hall feels like a lifetime ago. The camera would finally settle down, resting on a steady, calm angle. Warm, golden sunset light is now spilling through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my Los Angeles penthouse, casting a peaceful glow over the velvet sofa and the glass coffee table. A lot has changed in the months since that afternoon. As expected, Chloe filed for divorce less than a week after the presentation. Once she realized there was no secret bank account, no million-dollar contract, and absolutely no luxury lifestyle left to exploit, she packed her bags and left Marcus with nothing but the clothes on his back. She tried to pivot her social media presence and rebrand herself as a victim of financial ruin. But the fashion industry is incredibly small and fiercely protective of its own. The story of her throwing a priceless Vicuna masterpiece into the garbage had already spread to every major PR agency and brand director in the country. She was permanently blacklisted. Her follower count plummeted, and she was forced to move back to her hometown living entirely offline. Marcus fared much worse. My corporate debt collection firm aggressively pursued every single cent he owed. We legally seized his failing media agency, liquidated its remaining assets, and repossessed his leased luxury cars. Without his fancy suits and his fake executive title, the reality of his incompetence finally caught up with him. He is currently working a grueling dead-end sales job, making cold calls from a tiny cubicle. A massive percentage of his modest paycheck is aggressively garnished every single month and deposited directly into my corporate accounts to settle his debt. He is spending the rest of his life slowly paying back the exact same sister he tried to destroy. We have not spoken a single word to each other since the day security dragged him out of my building. As for me, I finally took possession of Nana's beautiful Brooklyn brownstone. But I did not sell it, and I did not keep it for myself. I wanted to honor the true spirit of my grandmother, a black woman who built an empire from nothing. I completely renovated the historic building and transformed it into a fully funded art and fashion incubator for single women of color. Today it serves as a creative sanctuary where talented-driven women receive the mentorship, resources, and financial grants they need to build their own businesses. Nana's legacy is no longer tied to a toxic golden child. It is actively funding the next generation of brilliant female founders. Looking back on everything that happened, the biggest lesson I learned was the absolute necessity of setting boundaries. Society conditions us to believe that we have to forgive and tolerate our abusers simply because we share the same DNA. But blood relation is not an excuse for toxic behavior. You do not owe your peace, your success, or your sanity to people who only view you as a punching bag. For years, I allowed their narrative to dictate my reality. I accepted the scraps of basic decency they occasionally threw my way because society constantly tells us that family is everything. But the precise moment Chloe dropped that priceless Vicuna scarf into the trash, she did not just throw away a massive inheritance. She threw away the invisible chains that had kept me bound to their exhausting, toxic expectations. When you finally stop seeking validation from people who are fundamentally committed to misunderstanding you, the entire world opens up. I built Maison Noire in absolute disciplined silence. I did not ask for their permission. I did not announce my business plans, and I certainly did not seek their applause. Instead, I used every single sneer, every condescending remark, and every rolled eye as the mortar for my foundation. They genuinely thought their constant belittling was keeping me in my designated place. They thought they were holding me down in the dark, suffocating my potential so they could shine brighter. I sit here on my velvet sofa, the warm Los Angeles sunset slowly fading into a deep, vibrant twilight. I set my wine glass down on the polished glass table and look directly ahead, making absolute unwavering eye contact with you. Imagine the camera slowly pulling back right now, widening the frame to show not just me but the beautiful, peaceful empire I built entirely on my own terms. The quiet, unbothered luxury of this room is a stark, poetic contrast to the loud, desperate chaos my brother and his ex-wife are living in today. My family looked at me and saw someone they could step on to elevate themselves. They tried to bury me, but they did not know I was a seed. The dark, lonely places they forced me into did not destroy me. They provided the absolute perfect conditions to take root, grow stronger, and eventually break through the surface with a terrifying force they could not even begin to comprehend. True power is taking the very weapons your enemies used against you and forging them into an untouchable crown. I know exactly how heavy the burden of family expectations can feel. I know the crushing guilt that sometimes comes with finally choosing to walk away. But I also know the incredible, breathtaking freedom waiting on the other side of that door. So now I want to turn the conversation over to you. I am speaking directly to the people watching this who know exactly what it feels like to be the family scapegoat. The ones who have been underestimated, overlooked, and openly disrespected by the people who were supposed to protect them. Have you ever used someone else's contempt as the foundation to build your own empire? Have you ever let the people who doubted you dig their own financial or social graves while you quietly constructed your throne? Tell me your story in the comments below. Do not hold back the details. Hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you believe that setting absolute unapologetic boundaries is the first critical step to unlocking your true potential. Share this video with anyone in your life who needs a powerful reminder that they are never defined by the toxic environment they were born into. Thank you for listening to my journey today. Remember, the ultimate revenge is not just achieving massive financial success. The ultimate revenge is living a life of absolute unshakable peace.